80 minutes. That is the number I keep coming back to. Prince Harry sat for 80 minutes at a round table in Washington with veterans, caregivers, and people whose names will never appear on a magazine cover or a Sussex officer headline. He arrived carrying a preview, a commercial solution. Those were the specific words, chosen deliberately, that would take what veterans learned in uniform and give it a price the civilian market would actually pay. Not a charity event, not a gala with auction paddles and a keynote under soft lighting. A product. Something built for revenue, designed to prove that the skills earned during military service translate into value a company would purchase on the open market. The name card in front of him said Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex. The name card directly across the table said Jason Wheeler, and Jason Wheeler did not travel to Washington to hear about a commercial product. He came to describe a surgery that his veterans' benefits would not cover. I want to sit with that image for a moment before anything else because the rest of this story lives inside it. A famous advocate previewing a future solution. A veteran across the same table describing a present failure. One side of the conversation promises what military skills are worth to the open market. The other side describes what the system has already refused to pay for inside a hospital room. Both are telling the truth. Both are sitting in the same circle. And by the end of those 80 minutes, the room had made a quiet, collective decision about which version of this conversation mattered more. It was not the preview. I want to walk through everything that happened inside that room because the specific details are where this story genuinely lives, and the distance between what was promised and what was described is considerably wider than any headline captured. Before the roundtable started, the room had already been arranged. I want you to picture this. A conference space in Washington, chairs pulled into a deliberate circle, water glasses filled and placed at precise intervals beside printed name cards. The chairs were identical, same height, same upholstery, same distance from the center of the table. The cameras were not. 3 were positioned behind and to the right of the chair, marked for the Duke of Sussex. A 4th framed the wider circle from a neutral angle. An aide adjusted the blinds twice before the participants arrived, checking the light on the convener's face each time. The room was designed to look like a conversation between equals. The camera architecture told a different story. Someone in that building understood that the listening session and the platform event were the same thing, and they built the set for both. On the Sussex officer website, the page is called Service Beyond the Battlefield. It is clean, carefully designed, and it positions Harry's veteran advocacy as a straight line. From the founding of the Invictus Games to policy conversations to the Walter Reed visit that same week, and now, finally, to what they are calling a commercial solution. The language is intentional. Commercial means revenue generating. Commercial means sustainable without the annual cycle of asking wealthy people to attend a dinner. Commercial means the answer will be a product the market will buy, not a favor the market will grant. That is a genuine ambition, and I want to acknowledge it clearly before going further. It is also, as of the day I am recording this, a landing page. No product name, no launch date, no published pricing structure, no name partner, no funding disclosure, no pilot program, no measurable commitment written anywhere on it. The ambition is real. The page is real. The product is not. The pattern is worth seeing whole, because this is not the first time the platform has preceded the delivery. The Invictus Games began as a single event, an idea Harry carried from his visit to the Warrior Games in the United States to a stadium in London. That worked. It genuinely worked, and it still works. But the trajectory since then has moved from events that exist to platforms that promise, and the commercial solution sits at the furthest point on that line. It promises a product. It describes a concept. It previews a future. It does not yet deliver a present. Harry's visit to Walter Reed that same week reinforced the institutional frame. A royal walking through a military medical centre, meeting staff, standing in corridors where wounded veterans have received care and been denied care in equal measure. That carries symbolic weight. It says the doors open for me. It says the military establishment takes me seriously. And it is true. The doors did open. The photographs exist. The visit is documented. But a visit is a credential, not a delivery. It proves Harry is welcomed by the institution. It does not prove that the institution's veterans have received anything from the commercial solution previewed at the roundtable. I want to walk through one corridor because it matters. On the second floor of Walter Reed, past the administrative wing, there is a rehabilitation unit where veterans work with physical therapists on injuries classified as service-connected. Harry was shown the facility. He met staff. He stood in spaces where cameras were permitted and was photographed beside people whose job is to provide the care the system authorises. What he was not shown, what no visiting dignitary is shown, is the office 3 doors down where a case manager reviews authorisation codes that determine whether the next round of treatment proceeds or stops. The corridor connects both rooms. The veteran walks between them. The dignitary walks past one and into the other. That distinction between access and delivery, between credential and product, between a photograph in a corridor and a surgery that gets covered, is what the 80 minutes actually tested. And the test did not go the way the preview intended. Here is where this becomes genuinely specific and worth sitting with. The 80 minutes opened with Harry's framing. The veterans in this room, he told them, are the proof that the skills earned in service have real value. The goal, as the AP reported it, was to preview a commercial pathway, a product or platform that would help veterans translate their military experience into civilian employment, compensation and recognition that the market would price fairly. The language was warm, respectful, forward-looking. It was the language of a person who has spent years building a public platform around veteran advocacy and believes the next step is to make that advocacy sustainable through revenue. Nobody in the room objected to the framing, not yet. Before Wheeler spoke, he had been in the room for nearly 20 minutes. An Independence Fund coordinator had walked him from the lobby, shown him his name card, and left him with a glass of water and the kind of silence that a conference room produces before the cameras start. He sat with a thin folder beside his glass. Inside it, I later learned, was the denial letter, the actual document printed on Benefits Administration letterhead that told a veteran his recommended surgery would not be covered. He had brought it the way you bring evidence to a hearing, not to wave it around, to have it there if anyone asked. Nobody would ask. But the folder was open when Harry sat down across from him, and the paper was visible to anyone looking. Jason Wheeler spoke early. He sat across from Harry with his name card centered in front of him and a glass of water he had not touched, and he described, without raising his voice and without dramatics, a surgery that his veterans' benefits would not cover. He named the procedure, he described the denial, he placed the specific cost, the gap between what his body required and what his benefits would authorise on the table as plainly as the water glass beside his name card. He was not making a political argument. He was describing a medical reality the system had created and then walked away from. The surgery was needed, the paperwork said no, and the gap between what his body carried and what his coverage would pay was not something a future commercial product could reach back in time and close. There was a silence after Wheeler finished, not the dramatic kind, the real kind, the kind where someone at a round table has said something so specific that the room needs a moment to decide what comes next. The person with the biggest name card shifted in his chair. An organiser from the Independence Fund, sitting near the edge of the circle with a clipboard balanced on her knee, would later describe the shift in simple terms. The dynamic change. The round table had opened as a platform event, a convener with a preview, an audience of participants arranged in a circle, cameras framing the conversation for future publication. After Wheeler spoke, it became a hearing, and the testimony was not about what veterans could offer the market. It was about what the system behind the market had already refused to offer them. The organiser said one more thing that has stayed with me. She watched Harry write something on the notepad in front of him after Wheeler finished. She could not read it from the edge of the circle, but she described the gesture in specific terms. The pen pressed hard enough to leave an indent visible from several seats away. She did not interpret what he wrote. She simply noted that a person performing attention writes lightly and a person carrying weight writes hard. If this breakdown is genuinely useful to you, the like button helps this channel keep reaching people who want the fuller picture. Now stay with me here, because what the other veterans said in the next 40 minutes is where this story changes shape entirely. It was not only Wheeler. Every name card at that table carried a story, and the stories accumulated. One veteran described transport. Specifically, he described being driven for hours to a VA facility for a scheduled appointment, arriving at the building, walking through the entrance, checking in at the front desk, and being told the provider was not available that day. Hours in a vehicle. A morning gone. A medical need that remained unaddressed when the veteran walked back to the parking lot and sat in his car for a while before starting the drive home, that is not a policy failure in the abstract. That is a Tuesday, the kind of Tuesday that a commercial product promising to value military skills does not touch. Because the problem is not that the veterans' skills are unrecognized. The problem is that the veteran's ride to the doctor ended at a closed door and nobody from the platform called to ask if he got home. Another described care gaps in local communities, the specific experience of returning from service to a town where the nearest specialist who understood service-related injuries was further away than the nearest grocery store. The community thanked him for his service. The community did not provide a provider who understood what his service had done to his back, his hearing, or his ability to sleep through a full night. The gap between gratitude and care is one of those distances that sounds small in a policy document and feels enormous in a kitchen at 3 a.m. Garrett Carnes brought employment into the room and made it specific. Carnes described the distance between what the military teaches you to do and what a civilian employer will recognise on a resume. The skills are real, the competencies are documented inside the military's own systems, but the certifications do not always translate across the line between uniformed service and civilian employment. A veteran who managed logistics for a combat deployment cannot necessarily present that experience in a format a corporate hiring manager will read as equivalent to a supply chain certification. The commercial solution Harry previewed is designed in principle to sit exactly in this gap, to make the translation legible, portable, and purchasable. But Carnes was not describing a gap waiting patiently for a future product. He was describing a gap that costs veterans income, professional identity, and career momentum every single month the translation does not exist. Then Sarah Verardo spoke. This is the moment I keep returning to. Verardo is a military caregiver and advocate. She has spent years in this space, long enough to understand the platform, the policy machinery, the publicity cycle, and the gap between all three. And she did something in that room that shifted the center of gravity of the entire event. She did not raise her voice. She did not challenge Harry directly. She redirected the platform. She named specifically and without apology what veteran-defined outcomes actually look like. Not outcomes shaped by a product designer in an office. Not outcomes framed by an advocacy team writing copy for a landing page. Outcomes described by the people who wake up inside the gap every morning and know exactly what would change their day. A covered surgery, a reliable ride, a provider within reach, a resume that translates. The room in that moment stopped belonging to the person who convened it. It started belonging to the people who told it what they actually need. That is the midpoint of this story, and I want to name it directly. Before Verardo spoke, the 80-minute roundtable was Harry's event, his platform, his preview, his commercial solution on the table beside his name card, framed by his cameras, amplified by his reach. After Verardo spoke, the roundtable became a benchmark hearing. The veterans had placed their testimony on the public record. A denied surgery, a broken transport ride, care gaps that a community filled with gratitude but not with providers, an employment translation that exists inside the military system but not outside it, and that testimony was now the standard against which any future commercial product would be measured. The product preview did not create the benchmark, the testimony did. The 80 minutes genuinely stopped being a listening session after that point. They became an accountability clock. Every minute that passed after the testimony accumulated, the distance between the preview and the needs grew more visible. Not because Harry said something wrong, not because the veterans were hostile or ungrateful. The distance grew because the preview is about tomorrow and the testimony is about today, and no amount of platform sincerity can collapse the gap between a product that does not yet exist and a surgery that was already denied. Let me land the sharpest reading here because this is where I come down after sitting with all of it. A veterans policy researcher I have followed for years described the pattern in terms worth placing here. Celebrity advocacy platforms, she wrote, generate attention that can be measured and outcomes that cannot. The attention is always documentable, the outcomes are always forthcoming, and the veterans are always the evidence that the platform matters, rather than the people who receive what the platform eventually delivers. That line has sat with me since the roundtable. A listening session works only when the person with the platform can prove they heard the people without one. Harry convened the roundtable. He sat for 80 minutes. He previewed a commercial solution. He visited Walter Reed that same week and let the photographs tell the institutional story. He used his name, his title, and his access to bring these veterans into a room with cameras, microphones, and the AP wire service. All of that is real. None of it is disputed. But the testimony those veterans placed on the table during those 80 minutes, Wheeler's denied surgery, the transport ride that ended at a closed door, Carnes' resume that does not translate, Verardo's redirection of the platform toward the people who define what useful actually means. That testimony is now the public record of what the commercial solution must deliver. And as of the day I am recording this, the commercial solution is a preview. It has a concept. It has a landing page on sussex.com under a title that says Service Beyond the Battlefield. It has an 80-minute roundtable behind it and a Walter Reed visit beside it. What it does not have is a launch date, a price, a named partner, a funding announcement, a pilot program, a measurable result, or a single veteran who can say the product changed their access to care, transport, employment, or benefits. The preview exists, the product does not, the testimony exists, the answer does not, the name cards are still on the table in the way that matters. One person connected to the event, someone who worked on the logistics rather than the advocacy, described the end of the round table in a way that has stayed with me. After the 80 minutes ended, Harry stood in the corridor for photographs. He shook hands with each veteran individually. He thanked them by name. This person said he seemed like someone who had heard what was said and understood the weight of it. But this person also noticed something else. A junior staff member collected the name cards from the table, placed them in a clear folder, and put the folder in a bag that went into the back of a vehicle. The veterans left the building separately. Some drove themselves. One of them sat in the lobby for a while, checking his phone, waiting for a ride. A veteran sitting in a lobby. After testifying about transport failures at a round table about a commercial solution, waiting for someone to pick him up. That is the story. Now I want to be fair, and I genuinely mean that. A preview at a listening session can reasonably come before the product details. That is how development works in every industry. You listen, you learn, you research, you build, you test, you launch. Harry was not at that round table to unveil a finished platform. He was there to listen and to signal that something commercial is coming. That is a legitimate stage in a legitimate process, and pretending otherwise would not be honest. Previews happen before products. The fact that the product does not exist today does not automatically mean the product will never exist. And his platform did something the commercial product has not yet done. It amplified. Harry's name, his cameras, his access to the AP wire took Jason Wheeler's denied surgery and Sarah Verardo's redirection and placed them in front of an audience of millions who would never have heard either name without the name card that said Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex. The microphone he provides is real. The reach is real. The attention that follows him into a room is real. If you judge the 80 minutes purely as a listening event, they did what listening events are supposed to do. People spoke. A person with a platform heard them. The words reached further than they would have reached alone. Both of those readings are available, and I want to hold them side by side before I close. The generous reading says Harry sat for 80 minutes, heard veterans describe real gaps in care, transport, employment, and benefits, and used the largest platform available to him to make those gaps visible to an audience that might otherwise never have known Jason Wheeler's name. The listening is the value. The platform is the contribution. The commercial solution, when it arrives, will carry the testimony of the roundtable inside its design. That reading is defensible, and I want to give it its full weight. The uncomfortable reading says the 80 minutes created a public record that now sits beside an empty launch page. The veterans named specific failures at a table, convened by a person previewing a product that has no date, no price, no funding, no partner, and no measurable result. The testimony is specific. The promise is not. The veterans place their needs on the record, and the record is waiting for an answer that has not arrived. That reading is also defensible, and I am not going to choose between them for you. I keep coming back to the name cards. I told you at the start, this story sits on a number, and the number is 80, but the image underneath it is the name cards. Harry's on one side of the table, Wheeler's directly across, Verardo's beside the chair where the platform changed hands, Carnes is beside the employment gap, no product has closed. The name cards were placed before the roundtable started by someone whose job was to make sure every seat was labelled and every glass was filled. After 80 minutes, the glasses were empty, and the name cards were still in position, carrying the full weight of what was said between them. They are still there now, in the way that matters. Printed, placed, and waiting beside a page on sussex.com that says "Service Beyond the Battlefield" and shows a commercial solution with no launch date printed anywhere on it. The 80 minutes have passed. The testimony is on the public record. Wheeler described a denied surgery. A veteran described a ride to a closed door. Carnes described a resume that does not translate. Verardo described what it means when the people inside the gap define the outcomes instead of the person holding the microphone. Those are not policy ambitions. Those are not white paper recommendations. Those are Tuesdays. And the commercial solution that sat across the table from every one of those Tuesdays is still today a preview on a website where the word commercial is doing all the heavy lifting. Was the roundtable the beginning of measurable action? The moment Harry's commercial promise moved from concept to accountability.